Um, Today I'm presenting a report I've been working on for many months called the Autism Spectrum Disorder and Gender Dysphoria Report and Detransition Survey. My co-author, Maddie Rowley, conducted the interviews for this report. It's for Michael Schellenberger's nonprofit, Environmental Progress, and it will be published on a website later this month. The premise for this report is the disproportionate representation of adolescents and young adults with autism or autistic traits among those seeking gender clinic services or adopting a trans identity. In my interviews with detransitioners, I discovered a lot of them had been finding out that they have autism, and this was a significant contributor to their decision to detransition. So the purpose of this report was to investigate the relationship between autism and gender dysphoria, as well as to examine the impact of the gender-affirming model of care. It is very long, and it contains a number of literature reviews, and it will be available online as a resource for anyone. So I'm going to go through a few highlights. Research consistently shows that a large number of individuals seeking gender clinic services have autism diagnosis or autistic traits determined by various screening tools. It can range anywhere from 5 to 47% in the studies that we reviewed. Like a small study from this year from a youth gender clinic in the US that found 47% had an autism diagnosis. A 2018 study conducted at GIDS at the Tavistock found 35% of adolescents had moderate to severe autistic traits measured by a screening tool. Other studies found autistic youth are 3 to 4 times more likely to have a diagnosis of gender dysphoria than non-autistic youth. Beyond gender clinics, surveys find a disproportionate number of trans-identified individuals have an autism diagnosis or autistic traits. The majority of autistic youth adopting trans identities or seeking transition services are female, so it becomes necessary to look at what's going on with adolescent females. Research consistently shows that girls with Asperger's or high-functioning autism do not get diagnosed until adulthood and are often misdiagnosed with other conditions. One estimate suggests as many as 80% of females do not get diagnosed until 18, which has serious consequences for their mental health. Males are referred for assessments at 10 times more often than girls. Historically, autism was more often diagnosed in boys to the extent that it was often referred to as a boy's disorder. But the sex ratio has become more balanced over the years. A lot of research has been conducted to investigate genetic and environmental factors associated with autism, but it's still sort of a mystery, so it remains challenging to accurately determine the true prevalence or the sex ratio. As individuals with autism age, the sex ratio becomes more balanced. So studies that found a sex ratio of 4 to 5 males to every female in children changes to 2 males to every female in adult. This indicates a non-biological factor. So something is preventing girls from getting diagnosed early. There are a few explanations that have been proposed that you can read more about in detail in this report, but I want to talk about what happens to young girls who do not get diagnosed early. This is something I speak to from personal experience because I didn't get diagnosed with Asperger's until I was 30. I spent my teens in and out of psychiatric hospitals, group homes, wilderness camps, and a year in a long-term residential treatment facility in Utah. I was desperate to figure out what was wrong with me so I could fix it. I would try on all different kinds of diagnoses to see what fit. And that is why I think may be happening with some young girls today who have found trans as a way to explain why they are the way they are, why they have trouble coping with life, why they don't fit in with their peers. So I propose the following hypotheses. Hypothesis 1A posits that a partial explanation for the increase in transgender identification among adolescent females is due to the fact that autistic girls do not get diagnosed until adulthood, often. For those who were diagnosed with autism at a young age, they may have a limited understanding of their condition until they reach adulthood. Hypothesis 1B attempts to offer an explanation as to why. It says that females may be misattributing their autistic traits as symptoms of gender dysphoria. Individuals with autism, particularly those who are undiagnosed, face challenges in attributing their experiences due to a lack of information and awareness of the condition. Without understanding autism and its characteristics, they struggle to find explanations that fit their experiences. So in their quest for understanding, they may turn to gender dysphoria as an answer to their differences because it is more familiar and widely discussed in mainstream culture. There are a number of autistic traits that overlap with gender dysphoria or can contribute to the adoption of a trans identity, and you can read about all of these in detail in the report. Research in this area has changed over the years. Prior to 2016, a lot of the research I reviewed seemed to view gender dysphoria as a psychiatric condition with several paths to resolution, but from 2016 on, with exceptions, of course, a more radical perspective emerged that used gender identity as innate and biological. This was reflected in treatment recommendations and research as well. Prior to 2016, a lot of the research cautioned against diagnosing gender dysphoria in autistic patients. But after 2016, a lot of the researchers began to adopt transgender activism in their research, including efforts to reduce barriers to gender-affirming care. One individual who has been extremely influential in this area is John F. Strang, who created the first guidelines and first program addressing the co-occurrence of ASD and GD. He is often relied upon as the foremost expert of autism and gender dysphoria, and of course he's a strong proponent of the gender-affirming model, despite the fact that a study at his own clinic found that 29% had changed their requests for hormones over a 2-year follow-up. He won't use the word detransitioners. He says that they are individuals who have changed their gender journeys. In a recent panel, Strang said he thinks the media attention surrounding trans issues has been a positive for attracting new clientele in his program, including lots of little ones and even autistic youth who have intellectual disabilities. Autistic people deserve better. Research on autism and gender dysphoria predominantly focuses on individuals who currently identify as transgender, which is why we need more research on autistic detransitioners. So I recruited participants through social media and snowball sampling. After vetting each participant, I shared the Google Forms survey link. In total, 94 participants, including detransitioners, those who medically transitioned, and desisters, those who socially transitioned without medical interventions, completed the survey. And the survey allowed for participants to contribute comments throughout. There were 80% females and 20% males. 84% identified as transgender, while 16% identified as non-binary. Adolescence was the most common period for individuals to start identifying as transgender or non-binary. 65.6% said they began between the ages of 11 and 17. The second most common period was early adulthood, 25.8% between the ages of 18 to 25. The duration of their trans identity varied from 1 to 20 years. On average, those who detransitioned medically did so after approximately 7 years. Those who solely underwent social transition and later desisted did so after an average of 5 years. These findings are consistent with other research on detransitioners. So I isolated a subgroup of detransitioners and desisters who either had a formal ASD diagnosis or autistic traits measured by an autism screening tool. This was the first time I believe anybody has administered an autism screening tool to this population. 73% of survey participants either had an ASD diagnosis or had autistic traits measured by the screening tool, but do not get overexcited about this. This particular finding was biased due to a non-random participant selection. So further research is needed for a more representative sample of autistic individuals in the broader detransition community. Of the 40 who did have an ASD diagnosis, only 22.5% received it during the preferred age range of under 10 years old. 57.5% did not receive their diagnosis until age 18 or older, and 20% between the ages of 11 and 17. If you ask any autism researcher, they'll tell you that early detection is crucial and it makes a huge difference in long-term outcomes for these individuals. 85% of the survey participants opted to take the Autism Spectrum Quotient screening tool, and of those who didn't take it, many of them said that they already had an autism diagnosis or they were certain they were not on the spectrum. So 26 to 30 is indicative of mild autistic traits, 31 to 35, mild to moderate, 36 to 40, moderate to high, and then it goes into the very high range. So I isolated those who scored 26 and up and compared them to those who had an autism diagnosis and also took the AQ. And you can see that some of those in the blue columns who are not diagnosed might benefit from an assessment. One of the major themes to emerge among the comments I received was that an autism diagnosis provided the clarity they needed. Being diagnosed with autism was one of the major things that made me question my transition. Learning I had ASD gave me all the answers to my lifelong struggles with identity, and in only a matter of months after getting my ASD diagnosis, the gender dysphoria ceased entirely because I finally understood where it all came from. Getting diagnosed has changed my life completely, and though I think I missed out a lot by not being diagnosed younger, I'm very grateful for it now. It's a relief to finally know what it was. And this is something I can speak to personally. When I was diagnosed with Asperger's at 30, my entire life finally made sense. I could not have gotten my life together without knowing. I'm going to go through a few of these questions that I asked to give you a general idea of what you'll find in the report. 95.6% expressed a struggle in understanding their identity, often becoming preoccupied with finding an identity. As the respondents learned about the concept of gender identity and the possibility of being transgender, 95.6% began to reinterpret their life history through this lens, which involved reevaluating past experiences and searching for potential signs of being transgender. 85.3% said that gender identity and transgender issues became a special interest. A special interest is a common feature among autistic people, which is a topic or hobby that becomes an intense, all-consuming preoccupation, kind of like gender medicine is for me. I haven't been able to think or talk about anything else for the last 2.5 years. Black and white or rigid thinking is another common feature of autism. About 90% recognized a tendency towards black and white thinking, and that this thinking pattern often led them to view transgender as the root cause of all of their issues, with transitioning seen as the solution to all of their problems. 87% also struggled with flexible thinking, and once they decided they were transgender, they latched onto the idea and found it very difficult to consider other alternatives. Close to 93% reported difficulties with social communication and interpreting social cues, which made it difficult to navigate gender norms and societal expectations. This led to a preference for online socialization among 90% of respondents, and you know what happens there. When they were exposed to the concept of being transgender, which often involves a profound sense of discomfort of the body, 82.6% related to this experience and began associating their own bodily discomfort with being transgender. There are a lot more questions like this, but I'm going to move on to another subset from the study that does not deal with autism. I isolated the subgroup of detransitioners who had medically transitioned. 67% had undergone a medical transition, 8.5% underwent puberty blockers, 66% cross-sex hormones, 33% had a chest surgery, either double mastectomy or breast augmentation, and 13.8% underwent additional surgeries such as vaginoplasty, hysterectomy, facial surgery, metoidioplasty, penectomy, or phalloplasty. I asked a series of questions, and I'm going to go over a few important ones. 98.4% reported insufficient exploration by healthcare professionals or other potential reasons for their gender-related distress before undergoing transition. 95% were immediately affirmed in their transgender identity by either a mental health professional, medical doctor, or both. I'm going to skip over a lot for time, but I wanted to highlight what I viewed as the most alarming finding in this study. I asked a few questions to find out what healthcare professionals were telling their patients. And this is 85.7% reported that their healthcare professionals led them to believe that they were inherently born transgender, possessed no control over their transgender identity, and that the medical intervention was their only option. This is insane. There is no empirical evidence to support a biological basis for a fixed gender identity from birth. Gender dysphoria is a psychiatric condition with a high rate of desistance, which therapy can help with. But this cohort, is under the current gender-affirming model is actively being misled by their own doctors and therapists. 50% said their healthcare provider told them that they had either a male brain in a female body or a female brain in a male body. And 27% said they could not remember if this was said. This comes from the idea that there's a brain-body mismatch in transgender patients, that medical interventions are necessary to align their bodies with their brains. It's based off a number of brain studies in transgender patients that failed to control for confounding variables like sexual orientation. They claim to find a small region in the brain that structurally resembles the opposite sex, but when researchers control for sexual orientation, they find that the brains of trans-identified individuals were similar to those of the same birth sex rather than the opposite sex. I'm going to show you one image from one brain sex study because our friend Sammy Stagg couldn't be here today to give you the full presentation. This study claimed to show that trans women's brains were shifted towards their gender identity by 25%. Guess how many homosexual participants were in the study? 25%. Another one was that 50% said a healthcare professional told them that sex is best understood as a spectrum or something other than binary. Also pseudoscience. This leads to my public service announcement. No one, neither children nor adults, can give informed consent to a medical treatment if their doctor is misinforming them about the nature of their condition. I'm totally down with trans people. I have many trans friends. I just want people to receive accurate information so that they can make better informed decisions. And it is clear that a lot of young people are being deprived of information that can help them make decisions that they will be happy with in the long term. The rest of my report will be available online to read soon. This was a preliminary study that will help guide future research that I plan to publish in a journal. And thanks to Wilfred Riley, who's here, he's offered to help. He has access to an institutional review board at his university to help make that possible. This concludes my talk.